Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to another video from JP Tech. In this video we're going to be taking a look at the 9700K at 5.1 gigahertz. We're going to be using the 1080 Ti along with this. We're going to be testing on high preset QHD resolution today, and we're going to be looking at all 8 maps in Battlefield 5 Conquest. By looking at all 8 maps, I also have been able to narrow down what is the most demanding map on your computer hardware. So I hope you find this video exciting. Be sure to let me know what you guys think in the comments, of course. Before we get into the main content, behind me is the H500i NZXT case that I recently switched all my Ryzen hardware into. I was previously using the S340 Elite and I wanted to give the new H500i a test run. I have a video coming on this switch here pretty soon where I also address the pros and cons of those two cases. I'm also waiting on the ML360R Cooler Master AIO. That should be in sometime this week, and I'm pretty excited to see how that works on the 9700K, 8700K, probably Ryzen, maybe even the 8600K. Let me know what you guys want to see in the comments below. But let's go ahead and get into the main content of what you all came here to see.
Perfect.
Alright guys, so what I want you to do, I'm going to show you some gameplay footage, of course, like I traditionally do with the system performance metrics on screen, so you guys can see how the 9700K does at those high presets at QHD. What I want you to also do though is go ahead and think about which of the 8 maps you think perform the best and which perform the least. If you've never played, you're going to be taking just a complete guess, and if you have played, you know, you might have a good idea. We'll see how this lines up with what other people have experienced, but go ahead and keep these map names in mind, all the way from Aris, Hamada, Aerodome, Twisted Steel, Fiel, Devastation, Narvik, and Rotterdam. I want you to keep these 8 maps in mind as I cover some things. Toward the end of the video, I'm going to let you know which map is the most demanding and which map is the least demanding. We're actually going to look at them all on a scale of best performing to worst performing. So stay tuned.
Thank you, Medic.
While you guys watch this footage, I want to take the time to point out that the 9700K has been an excellent performer in Battlefield 5. Battlefield 5 at times does use the 9700K, even overclocked, to quite a high utilization. But the benefit in that is that it's not quite pegging it out in most scenarios, and it's getting the most out of the 8 cores. One thing that's very interesting about Battlefield 5 is that though it can use up to 16 threads, it doesn't always benefit if it's in the form of hyperthreading or SMT. And one thing that I've been seeing so far is that hyperthreading and SMT don't really do too much extra in Battlefield. This is something I'll cover a little bit more, but I want to bring it up because it makes the 9700K a very special performer in this game.
He didn't accept my friend's request, I just don't know what's going on with him. Slit his throat really quick. Or you fucking like push him in the water and watch him drown.
So the high preset, I'm using the high preset because I think that the high preset is a pretty good balance between visuals and performance for the most part, and that's if you're gonna play at about 120 Hertz on a QHD display. If you want a little bit more performance, I do have a custom configuration that I like to play at personally, so that I can achieve better frame rates, more for something along the lines of 144 Hertz to 165 Hertz. But I'm using the high preset, and just because it's something relatable, it's something that can be easily set, and you know, this is the kind of performance you could expect out of this hardware.
Yeah, second story of the barn.
One thing that I've noticed talking about the 9700K in general is that it is a nice overclocker. It seems that most chips will do 5.1 gigahertz, and at a pretty low voltage in reality. I was able to get my 9700K very stable at 5.1 gigahertz at only 1.31 volts. You know, your mileage will vary. Some people, I'd be surprised if anyone really can't hit 5.1 gigahertz. With any overclocking, really, there's a wall where it takes a lot more voltage to get another 100 megahertz, and that wall is where you really have to determine whether or not it's worth it. And in my experience with the 9700K, that wall for me was at 5.1 gigahertz. I get efficient, powerful overclocks there, but when I go to 5.2 gigahertz, it takes a pretty solid bump in voltage. A bump in voltage that's not really worth it. And it's really the kind of voltage bump that I saw with the 8700K. I didn't really get the best binned 8700K, so 4.9 was the sweet spot for that. I was able to do it at 1.325, whereas bumping up to 5 gigahertz took me 1.4 volts. So it's a lot more voltage, a lot more heat, and just overall more strain on the processor, all for, you know, another 100 megahertz. It's just not worth it in my opinion. And I've experienced the same thing on the 9700K. When I go from 5.1 to 5.2, I need somewhere a lot closer to 1.4 volts, and I just don't see it worth it. The extra 100 megahertz really isn't doing enough for me for all that extra voltage and heat. So talking about heat, how does the 9700K do? Well, as you're going to see in a lot of this gameplay footage here in Battlefield 5, Battlefield 5 is really more of the more strenuous gaming scenario for a processor, for the most part. There are other scenarios, but I'm just saying that typically what you see in Battlefield is going to be more of a worst case scenario. The temperatures are pretty good in Battlefield 5. I'm using the ML240 Cooler Master. It's a 240 millimeter AIO. I do set a custom curve on it. I don't like my fans at 100% all the time, so I'm not really ever at 100% fans during my Battlefield 5 gameplay. But one thing I do notice is if I run an AVX stress test, a reasonable one like Realbench, I'll hit about a peak temperature of 82°C, and that's with a room temperature around 74 degrees Fahrenheit. So really not too bad, but like I say, that's at a pretty reasonable voltage. You know, if I'm really going to push for 5.2 and I want it to be AVX stable, really not even AVX stable, like just like doing a bunch of Cinebench runs at 1.4 volts with the 9700K and this cooler is not, it's just not quite enough cooler. But if you're doing 5.1 gigahertz and you know you're using this ML240, it's a pretty good cooling solution for this. And like I say, peak temperature hit 82. I haven't seen higher than 82 in any situation. You know, if you wanted to use the 9700K stock or even with less of an overclock than what I'm running, of course you would see lower temperatures. I did mention that I'm getting an ML360 that's coming to test as well, so I think that that's really going to be what's ideal for these 8-core chips. But again, a good air cooler or an ML240 or similar AIO is pretty sufficient for overclocking the 9700K. There's always room for temperature improvements though, but the good thing is it does come soldered. Unless you're really trying to tweak for temperatures, there's not much of a need to delid the 9700K. The 9900K is a different animal. But the 9700K, I just don't see a need to delid it unless, you know, I guess if you already have the stuff to delid and you want to take, you know, you want to go a little bit further with a cooler you already have, that might be an option. But overall, I think that in soldered form, the processor does very well. So with temperatures out of the way, I also wanted to point out that I'm using this on a Z370 Asus Hero motherboard. I'm running the latest BIOS, and at this overclock configuration, I'm having zero issues with any kind of stability. All my temperatures seem pretty good. We're going to do more of a temperature review on the 9700K in the future, but I just wanted to point out that I am using this on a Z370 motherboard, and I've been very satisfied with the performance. It's definitely a drop in and use it no problem scenario. 9900K, different scenario, especially if you're going to overclock, but in my opinion, the 9900K is for a very special buyer, and I just can't recommend that processor to much of anybody. In this system, I'm also using Trident's, G.Skill Trident's 3600 B-die memory. It's 16, 16, 16, 36 timings. The full system specs for this system in use here, of course, will be in the description below. Overall, the 9700K has unleashed basically the best performance you're going to get out of Battlefield 5 in a CPU perspective. Now, I also want to note that I don't necessarily encourage anybody just to go out and buy a 9700K. I think that you might need a certain use case to justify it, because the 8600K also does a very good job in Battlefield 5. The 9700K does give you better performance, but you really got to determine if you need that extra level of performance, and most of that extra level of performance comes from using a 1080 Ti, a 2080, a 2080 Ti, those higher tier cards. So if you're using something like 1080 might be the line, but if you're using like a 1080 and under, you might not necessarily be after the 9700K. But if the budget allows, 9700K is going to show to be an excellent gaming processor for now and into the future. I know next year we're going to be looking at some really fantastic processor options, as the competition is ferocious right now between AMD and Intel. But I don't think that there's going to be any issue with buying a 9700K from just an overall gaming perspective and overall use. What I don't recommend though is if you already have an 8 series, an 8600K, especially an 8700K, I don't really think that the 9700K is a good move for you. If you're on probably like a 6700K, maybe a 7700K, because they're very similar processors, and you're just looking to get something extra, and your primary use case is gaming above all, I would say the 9700K is a fantastic choice. If gaming is not the number one thing you do, I would probably not even look at Intel currently. I would probably look at a 2700X, maybe even something less from AMD Ryzen. I think that they're fantastic processors, and especially high refresh gaming, that's something I actually need to emphasize a little bit more. If high refresh gaming is not the number one thing that you do on your computer, you probably don't need an Intel processor. Now, if high refresh gaming is something that you really enjoy and it's number one or near the number one thing on your system, you want an Intel processor, and probably if you're shopping now for an all new system, a 9700K is going to be an excellent choice. So now that we've covered a lot of footage of the 9700 and 1080 Ti and tackling the high preset at QHD, let's go ahead and cover that part that you guys have been waiting for. Let's go ahead and point out which of the maps perform the best and which ones perform the worst. Let's go ahead and get into that right now. Alright guys, so again I want to reiterate that each of these maps, each of the performance data for these maps was recorded from the beginning and to the end of a match. So it does include dying, it does include quick switches of weapon class, and it includes about 15 to 25 minutes of gameplay footage for each map. This is a little bit more of a worst case scenario where there's more things going on, there's more people around, there's just more action. So this is basically the worst case for the scenario on the given preset and resolution. So as we can see, I went ahead and organized this chart from best performing to least performing. This is organized by average frame rate, but one thing you'll notice is that the 1% lows overall are quite consistent on majority of the maps, all but about 2 of them. There's about a 40 FPS difference on average from the best performing to the worst performing map in Battlefield 5. And this is something you really need to consider when you are trying to configure your settings for best performance. Realistically, you probably want to configure your performance settings on the Narvik map or Rotterdam, something like that. One of these worst performing maps are what you want to pick when you're setting your graphics for the most playable setting for your hardware. If you set your performance up for Hamada and then you get Narvik next, you're going to be in for a rude awakening in the way the game performs. So that's another reason why I wanted to actually point out why you would want to know what the best performing map is and what the least performing map is in Battlefield 5, because these are the maps that show the most strain on the hardware, and these are the maps that you should probably be on when you configure your hardware for this game. So moving on to the next chart here, we can see that the game order changes a little bit, but these first 6 maps, probably 5 maps, are the closest. The first 5 maps in this chart are very close and 1% lows. After that, we start to decline a little bit, and when we're looking at Rotterdam and again Narvik, we're looking at the worst 1% lows of all 8 maps. When we move on to the final chart here, we're looking at 0.1% lows, and again we see Narvik and Rotterdam at the bottom of the chart, and we see Hamada and Aris at the beginning, along with Aerodome, which, as you saw on the very first average frame rate chart, they have very good average frame rates. And this is something that's quite noticeable. When I play these maps, these are definitely maps that stick in my head as maps that do get consistently better frame rates, and the data only supports that. I would say, from not even looking at performance metrics, just on what I experience when I play the game, I would hands down say that Narvik is the map that takes the biggest performance hit. And when I gathered performance data for all these maps, I was not surprised whatsoever to find that Narvik was at the bottom of the chart for performance. It's something you can feel, and I highly recommend playing this map when you configure your computer for Battlefield 5. That about wraps up the video for the 9700K performance on the high preset at QHD. We're going to be, of course, evaluating more on the 9700K in Battlefield 5 and other scenarios in the future. And we're also going to be, of course, going back to the 8700K, 8600K, and looking at some of the other scenarios that some of you had asked me for. And, of course, I didn't forget about Ryzen. I actually changed the memory to AMD Spec memory in there, and I'm going to cover more of that, of course, in some videos to come. But I want to let you know I didn't forget about Ryzen. We're definitely going to be covering Ryzen in Battlefield 5. But what did you guys think? Did you guys were you guys right about what you guessed on which maps performed the best and which ones performed the worst? I thought it was kind of interesting, and I hope you guys thought it was interesting as well. Of course, remember to use Rotterdam or Narvik, preferably when setting your graphic settings in the game for your hardware. Whatever best result you get on those 2 maps is going to only potentially be better on the other maps, based on what I've been seeing. So I hope you guys found that information useful. And as always, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you want to see more from JP Tech, hit subscribe. And until the next time, I'll see you guys around. Thanks for watching.